For the first time since Game 6 of the NLCS, the New York Mets play a baseball game today. On the show, I'll talk about that and the top position battles to watch throughout the Grapefruit League action this spring training.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Well, the New York Mets will play an actual baseball game today. Mets versus Astros. Clay Holmes on the mound. Francisco Lindor, Juan Soto, and Pete Alonso all in the starting lineup. That is what we know going into the day as I record this late on Friday night. And it's going to be a lot of fun to watch the SNY crew cover the game. The game should be televised if you get SNY. I believe it's also available on the MLB app with SNY. So that's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to get to see Juan Soto take his first real at-bat in a Mets uniform, or I guess his first spring training at-bat in a Mets uniform. It's going to be a blast. But what I wanted to do today is I want to break down the top position battles that you're going to get to watch throughout camp this year. I know I did promise some episodes on the Mets' top prospects. I've been really diving into the farm system over the past week, really, and I keep on expanding my list. So now instead of a top 10 this year, I'm going to give you a top 15 and maybe some just missed guys. I think I want to do a whole episode on the top catchers in the Mets farm system, maybe one of the top pitchers, the top pitchers that could end up being high leverage relievers. So I got a lot of prospect content that's going to come your way this month that I want to spend some more time working on. I don't want to rush it. So that should start to come your way next week. But let's get into the topic of the day, which is position battles to watch throughout camp this year. I think the most prominent one that you're going to see the most in these Grapefruit League games that could impact who actually makes the roster is that competition for the final bench spot. As you go around the lineup, we've talked about this a bunch, but the Mets are pretty much set with 12 of their position players, barring injuries, out of the 13 that they're going to carry. You know, Pete Alonso is your starting first baseman. Jeff McNeil is going to be next to him at second. You have Lindor and Vientos on the other side of the infield. Alvarez behind the dish. Nimmo, one of the center fielders. That's going to be our next segment. And Juan Soto in the outfield. And you're going to have Jesse Winker and Starling Marte in a DH platoon. Those two center fielders will obviously make the roster, and Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor. And Luis Torrens is likely to be your backup catcher. So with all of that said, there's one spot, and there's a pretty thick competition in camp for that spot. You have Ronnie Mauricio coming off a torn ACL. He could factor into the mix, but I think it's pretty obvious at this stage, considering the fact that he is, I think, like 15 months post-surgery now. And he had another operation in August, we learned, to clear up some scar tissue, which really has helped him feel like himself again. And he finally is healthy. It's great news on the health front, but he's still behind. He's not going to get into any actual games until probably halfway through camp. You'll probably get a little snippet of him. He'll be one of the last cuts, I think, just to keep him with the big league camp, because you know that he's going to play a role on the team this year. But it makes the most sense for Ronnie Mauricio to go down to AAA, play all the time, and also probably get some playing time at third base, because I'd imagine if he ever ends up on the big league club this year, the Mets would like to be able to put him at third and put Vientos at DH at times, have him play some more second base. This is a guy that has primarily been a shortstop throughout his career, so he's going to be able to play that position easily. He has all the experience there, but increasing his versatility to be on a big league roster will be important. They might even want to stick him out in the outfield some, and above all else, they want to get him seeing pitching every day and get him playing every day, so they know they have a completely healthy player before they actually call him up and bring him up to the show. So Ronnie Mauricio is a guy on the outside looking in. I think Jared Young at this point is also a guy on the outside looking in. He was signed to a split contract, which means he could make the big league roster. He could be sent to AAA, guy that has a pretty good amount of power from the left side. He was with the Cubs for a long time, put up some really good numbers in their minor league system. Never quite was able to break through the big league club. Ended up with the Cardinals last year, where again he put up some good numbers in AAA. Left midseason to go play in the KBO and put up monster numbers. And now he's back but he's more of a corner guy than a guy that can play up the middle at second base. I just don't think there's enough versatility there for him to grab your last bench spot. I imagine he will start in Syracuse. This competition really comes down to three guys. Number one, Luisangel Acuna. Number two, Brett Baty. And then the guy that is a little bit of a dark horse, which is Nick Madrigal. Now, Nick Madrigal is the guy the Mets might pick if they just want the safest defensive floor, a guy that's not going to play much anyway, probably won't bring too much to the table offensively, but he will be able to give you great defense at third and second. He's going to get a lot of action at shortstop during these Grapefruit League games to see if he can handle the position, because whoever gets that last spot on the Mets bench is going to be the backup shortstop. Now, when Francisco Lindor is the starting shortstop, you don't need the backup shortstop to be a great defender at the position. You just need them to not be able, or to be able to hold it down a little bit in an emergency situation. I think there's a good chance, unless Luisangel Acuna makes the roster, that whoever that last bench spot is really just an emergency shortstop. And that's why you're going to see Nick Madrigal get a lot of run there in camp just to see what we can do. And I think Nick Madrigal has a better chance at being more than an emergency shortstop, where he actually might get a start if he was on the roster, if the Mets really wanted to protect Lindor, though Lindor is already saying, like, keep me in the lineup. Major League Baseball does a great job, he said, of scheduling off days, which is funny because most players will say they don't get enough off days. Lindor, I think, wants to be in there every single day, but if the Mets want to protect him a little bit, I could theoretically see Madrigal getting a game at some point, but really not as likely. This is where Luisangel Acuna has the biggest edge in camp, because he can be a traditional backup shortstop where you can put Lindor at DH for a day, let him get off his feet, and have a great defender at the position who's also a spark plug potentially at the bottom of your lineup. I think Luisangel Acuna is the favorite because of that, because he gives you the ultimate versatility on this team where he can be your backup shortstop. He can push those two guys we're going to talk about in the next segment in center field. If he's hitting, he could eat into their playing time. He could play second base. He could play third base. They're not going to put him at first, but he really can play all over the diamond, and I'm sure that they can stick him in left or right field if they absolutely needed to. So Luisangel Acuna gives you the most versatility. He gives you a guy to put off your bench that really gives you elite speed. Obviously, Starling Marte at times will be on the bench, so you can call on him to steal a base, but Luisangel Acuna is going to have the fresher legs. I'd rather see, what is Acuna, 22, 23 years old? I'd rather see him go out there in the eighth inning, running pretty much cold, than seeing Starling Marte at 36 have to come off the bench and steal that bag. Now, Marte might be just as effective at Luisangel Acuna at stealing the base, but Acuna's got all the athleticism in the world. He's the guy that I am sort of in some ways hoping makes the roster, because I think he makes the Mets the best possible team. I think he brings the most from that bench spot, but I'm also not going to count out Brett Baty, because Brett Baty, I think, offers the most upside offensively of these three players. Now, you're going to say, Ryan, really, Brett Baty offensively? But I'm sorry, look at the minor league numbers of Brett Baty compared to Luisangel Acuna. I know Acuna had an amazing 2 weeks, but I think you're fooling yourself a little bit if you think Acuna is a better offensive player than Brett Baty, who could provide more off of the bench, because Baty, still a big guy, strong guy, does have some power he can tap into, and he would give you another left-handed option off the bench. The Mets bench, pretty right-handed heavy. If Jesse Winker's in the starting lineup, it's pretty much all righties. Marte would be on the bench, Tyrone would be on the bench, one of your center fielders would be on the bench. Those guys are all righties. So Brett Baty would give you a lefty bat off the bench that you can put into a pinch hitting situation. He would give you probably your best backup third baseman. I guess defensively, Madrigal is probably just right there with Baty, maybe a little bit better. But the best all-around backup third baseman, if Vientos is struggling and you needed to give him a day, Baty would be a good guy to plug in there. If it's a really tough righty on the mound that you didn't want Vientos to face for whatever reason, a tough matchup for him, Baty is a left-handed complement. So I really see pluses and minuses for all three of those guys, but that's the competition I'm the most interested in camp, because these guys are going to play a ton. I bet you those three guys in particular register the most games, the most at-bats in camp. I really think so, because the Mets got to figure out what they have there. And I think ideally for them, they'd probably like to see one of their top prospects, or I guess for Acuna top prospects, Baty former top prospects, one of their development projects, one of their guys earning that job and get those big league opportunities. But Nick Madrigal is that floor option, similar to what Jose Iglesias was in camp last year. And actually, to a certain extent, maybe even more so what Zach Short was in camp, because Short ended up making the team, that ultimately, can fill a utility role and give you the defense without any real questions there. But you just wonder if they're going to give you much with the bat. I think Baty's your best option when it comes to the offense because he swings it from the left side and he does have a better track record in the minors than Acuna. And I'm still not entirely sure if Acuna will hit it in the big league level, especially when he's getting limited playing time. And that could also be a reason to put Acuna into AAA if you want to give him more time to develop. I think he needs that time in AAA more than Baty does. Baty sort of has to find out if he can sink or swim at the big league level. But Acuna makes the most sense to me as far as a roster fit. I think they'll get the most out of Acuna being on the roster, whereas I could see Baty or Madrigal sort of rotting away on the bench a little bit more, where Acuna is so flexible as a piece for Carlos Mendoza that I feel like he's just going to find his way into a lot of baseball games. But that is the top position battle to watch in camp. I think the job in center field is an underrated one, so I want to go through that a little bit in the next segment. First, though, a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you missed the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for that late game rally or if I'm picking a player to hit a clutch three. I never feel like I've missed any chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 13,000 subscribers. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. Let's talk a little bit here about the next position battle I have my eyes on this spring, and that's center field. So when you look at the Mets center field situation, they're going into this season with a pretty clear-cut answer. You're going to see Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor in a timeshare in center field, very similar to last year, where it was Harrison Bader and Tyrone Taylor. And just like last year, where Harrison Bader got the initial looks as more of the primary option, I believe that's going to be the case with Jose Siri. I think the Mets, similar to Bader, are looking at this situation. They're saying, that's a center fielder on our roster. Not that Jose Siri couldn't play left, couldn't play right. But when he's in the game, you want him in center field. I think they view Jose Siri's center field defense as a real plus. I think they view Tyrone Taylor's center field defense as a plus, his versatility as plus, so to speak, where they love the ability to start Tyrone Taylor in right field, to give Juan Soto a day where he DHs, to do the same thing in left, start Tyrone Taylor in left field, to give Nimmo a day. If late in the game you want to improve your defense and right, I think you're going to see a lot of Juan Soto coming out of the game late potentially, and Tyrone Taylor going in if the Mets are protecting a lead in the ninth inning. Now, you got to be careful with that. If it's a tight lead, you're not going to make that move because you certainly don't want to get a situation where someone blows a lead and now it's Tyrone Taylor hitting a Juan Soto spot in the lineup. But again, if the game is sort of in hand, you have a 4-1 lead, that's a situation where you throw Tyrone Taylor out there and, see what he can do to potentially, get an extra out for you if that opportunity presents itself. So I think Carlos Mendoza just recently said as much, talking about that versatility of Tyrone Taylor, how it's a huge asset and you're going to see a lot of them. At the same time, if he's hitting more than Jose Siri, there's going to be a little bit of a push to have him be the starting center fielder. So I think Jose Siri has a real inroad to be the quote unquote starting center fielder, the guy that gets the nod on opening day. But Tyrone Taylor can eat into that playing time. I also look at camp as an opportunity for some of these young guys to sort of get in line to be the potential center fielder this year. And, even the center fielder of the future down the road. So we're going to get an opportunity to see Luisangel Acuna take some fly balls in center field in games. See Jett Williams. I think when he gets out there, the Mets might put him in center field, and he is my pick right now to be the center fielder of the future for the Mets. Either him or a little bit further down the line, Carson Benj. And Drew Gilbert's in camp trying to change the narrative for himself. Drew Gilbert's a guy that was probably a consensus top 5 prospect in the Mets system last year. Some would still have him there, as I sort of alluded to at the top of the show. I'm going through my top now 15 prospects in the Mets system. I'm still not completely narrowed down on the list, but he definitely fell out of my top 5. And I wouldn't be surprised if he might fall out of the top 10. I think he's probably going to make it at the end of the list, but it's tough because he had a lost year due to injury. And while he held his own in the Arizona Fall League, I do wonder if he's not playing center field anymore, if he's more of a right fielder, fourth outfielder type, where do you put him on a top prospect list? This is an opportunity camp where he's going to get some time to play some games early, I'm sure, where Drew Gilbert can change the narrative for himself a little bit. And obviously, more of that work's going to be done in the backfields with Mets coaches, showing what he has. And I would not give up on him as a prospect whatsoever. But I think his stock is trending a little more down than up right now. So Drew Gilbert is a guy to watch in camp. But when it comes to the center field position, obviously Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor are going to man that spot. But if Jett Williams has a big camp, if Luisangel Acuna has a big camp, these are guys that this year could eat into the playing time in center field and maybe outright take that position over. I think Mets fans would love it if Jett Williams by the end of the season is the starting center fielder going into the playoffs, because that means that he tore the cover off the ball in the minor leagues, earned a promotion, and was able to hold his head above water and provide really good defense out there. So I think center field is definitely a position that's very in flux for the New York Mets right now. They have their stopgaps in place, but I think they're hoping for a brighter future with one of these prospects at some point over the next 2 to 3 seasons, including this year. I think Acuna has an early crack at it. Jett Williams might get there by the end of the season. Next year, it should be Jett Williams, honestly, that can grab that spot. And then Carson Benj, a guy that played college baseball before getting drafted and probably a little bit further along as a prospect that would have been drafted out of high school. You never know how quickly he can fly through the Met system. He was not invited to big league camp, though. So don't expect to see him this year or potentially even next year. But that's definitely a guy that's on the periphery in the background who could shoot up top prospect lists this year. And to be completely honest, I've been doing a lot of research on this lately, I'll tell you, Carson Benj, to me, he's in the top 5. So I'll just give you a little bit of teasers throughout. But what we're going to talk about in the final segment today is the other side of the position battles this year in camp. Pitchers to watch, pitchers who can really make a name for themselves in spring training and potentially fight for a bullpen spot or rotation spot. We're going to go through all of them in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so let's talk about the position battle, so to speak, in camp when it comes to your pitchers. And for the rotation, we've talked about it a bunch. Griffin Canning, Paul Blackburn, Tylor Megill, 3-man battle for 2 roster spots likely. The Mets are going to go with the 6-man rotation, and it sounds like they're going to start the year piggybacking the 5th and 6th starter, as they don't need 6 starters on the rotation until I think it was April 16th. When the Mets will finally need a 6th starter to give every single pitcher in their rotation 5 days rest. Clay Holmes, converted reliever, makes sense that he might need a little bit of extra rest throughout this year. Kodai Senga, obviously you're trying to protect his health. Sean Manaea, the one guy that I think would really be ready to go every 5th day throughout the season, because we saw him do it last year, but he also was a little bit tired at the end of the season. We saw him really wear out in the NLCS against the Dodgers. So maybe preserving him for a stretch run again, not a bad idea. And David Peterson, had 120 some odd innings last year and then added on to it in the playoffs. Guy that I think can do it in the 5-man rotation. But if you can preserve him a little bit, that's always a positive thing. And the Mets are obviously leaning into that this year because they have the starting pitching depth to do it. And those decisions can change, right, throughout the season. Last year, the Mets were rolling with a 6-man rotation with Christian Scott in the mix. They decided when David Peterson came back off the IL, it was time to option Christian Scott, monitor his innings, but also roll with a 5-man rotation of Quintana, Severino, Minaya, Peterson, and Megill. And they really stuck with that. So I think this year you're going to see the Mets roll with the 6-man until it's not working. So again, the competition in camp to watch is to see what Griffin Canning looks like, to see what Paul Blackburn looks like, and see if Tylor Megill can really push them, because Tylor Megill is the guy that probably does not make this team. But we say that every single spring training he finds his way on the roster. I think he's the best pitcher of the three. I really do. But he doesn't have the same roster flexibility. Or actually, excuse me, he has the roster flexibility. Blackburn and Griffin Canning do not. They cannot be optioned. The Mets don't want them on the roster. It either has to be due to an injury where they can put them on the IL, and there is a chance we see that with Paul Blackburn, just because we don't know how quickly he's going to progress, as he got that operation to deal with the spinal fluid leak in October. The timetable does have him in line to be ready for opening day, but we just don't know how he's going to progress in camp, and that's obviously something to watch. If he's ready to go, though, if the Mets decide Megill should be on the roster over one of those guys, they have to DFA them. And I don't think the Mets want to do that to their starting pitching depth early. So Megill likely is the first man up from Syracuse this year, which does give the Mets a lot of upside waiting in the wings. And I think you'll see the same thing as we get into the reliever conversation here, because Dedniel Nunez should make this team based on merit. I would say on stuff, he's probably right there as maybe the 1B to Edwin Diaz and pure stuff factor. But guy that got hurt last year, the Mets are going to be very careful with him. And I think they should. I don't see a reason why Dedniel Nunez should break camp when you have so many arms competing right now. And Nunez has the option. So send him down, have him in an extended spring training, let him really prove health. And yes, in some respects, are you wasting some bullets in the minor leagues? Potentially, sure. But if Dedniel Nunez can't pitch on back-to-backs and Sean Reed-Foley can, I'd rather see Sean Reed-Foley not get DFA'd and see Sean Reed-Foley make the opening day bullpen. And if he struggles or if he gets hurt, well, guess what? Once he gets hurt, Dedniel Nunez can come up and fill his spot. And that's how you really manage a roster throughout the season. So I think Nunez probably on the outside looking in, even though he's going to play a huge role in this team. That's the plan. But I think it just makes sense to preserve him a little bit. As I mentioned, Sean Reed-Foley does not have the ability to be optioned. So I think he has a chance, a really good one, to make the opening day bullpen. I think Danny Young has a shot at it as well, because he also does not have any options. But I think for him, AJ Minter starting the year on the IL, probably his most likely track to making the team. Otherwise, I think the Mets try to pass him through waivers at the end of camp and DFA him. It's my guess. But we'll see. We'll see what Danny Young looks like. He has a great slider, so you never know. He might earn one of those spots. And to get into how many spots are available, you count them up. You got Edwin Diaz. If AJ Minter is healthy, AJ Minter. Jose Budo is going to be in the bullpen. Ryan Stanek going to be in the bullpen. So those are 4 locks. Reed Garrett should likely be a lock, but he does have an option. So sometimes that does force you in the minor leagues to start the year. I believe last year Reed Garrett did start the season in the minor leagues. And then he was a quick call up, if I do recall correctly. The Mets had to preserve their guys last year. They had to preserve the guys that could not be optioned. Michael Tonkin made the team. You think Johan Ramirez was the other guy that made the team, specifically because they did not have that flexibility to go down. And I think for both of those guys, they got sort of passed around the league a little bit, because guys that are in that spot, they end up getting DFA'd, they get put on waivers, and teams grab them. So, Danny Young might be in that boat this year. Danny Young might wear 4 or 5 jerseys this season, where enough teams are bought in on his slider that they take a shot on him and he comes up, has a bad outing. Okay, you're gone. Or comes up, somebody is healthy off the IL. All right, you're gone. And it's kind of a rough spot to be in as a big leaguer. You almost would prefer to have an option just so that you could, I guess maybe not, because you're collecting big league salaries everywhere you're going. So I shouldn't necessarily say that, but it is a rough existence for a pitcher that just can't find a home. A guy to watch that could compete with Danny Young is Genesis Cabrera. Genesis Cabrera, you look at the numbers and you think, man, based on ERA, why didn't he get a big league opportunity? A 3.59 ERA last year out of the Blue Jays bullpen, 69 appearances, which is super nice, 62 and 2/3 innings pitched. So he got a lot of work and pitched to a good ERA. He only struck out 50, though, and had a whip of 1.47. So a pitch to contact guy that, ultimately, when it comes to the strikeout numbers, saw a bit of a decline. I mean, you look at the year prior, he had 58 Ks and 55 and 2/3. So 50 strikeouts and 62 and 2/3. Not great. But a guy that gets outs in the big leagues, and I would not discount that. Career 3.89 ERA over 272 games and 275 and 2/3 innings pitched. And that's, a lot of work. 70 innings in 2021, 44 and 2/3 in 2022, 55 and 2/3 in 2023, and again, 62 and 2/3 last year. So Genesis Cabrera, the guy to watch, and the way to know, and this is why we'll be monitoring this in particular a lot throughout camp. The guys who are pitching a bunch of these non-roster invites are the guys the Mets are seriously considering. Last year, we saw it with Austin Adams. He was getting a ton of appearances. He was striking out a lot of batters. I think Austin Adams came very close to making the team last year, but he was a late cut in camp because the Mets, again, wanted to preserve the guys that they would lose if they non-tendered. And honestly, I think that was a mistake. I think Austin Adams would have been a potential fixture in the Mets bullpen. He ended up having a really good season with the A's. He's the guy that mimicked or mocked the Mets with the OMG stuff. The A's pitcher you might remember during the season. He has really good stuff. So I do wonder if the Mets learned a lesson there, if they're still just going to rely on trusting the process of preserving roster flexibility. And if you could pass some of these minor league contracts down and get them into your system in Syracuse, it ends up working out better for you anyway, as far as flexibility. Other names to mention there, Anthony Gasse, another left-handed reliever that could compete if AJ Minter ends up starting the year on the IL. Gasse, career 4.78 ERA, not great. Rough numbers last year, but only a couple appearances. So we'll see. He's 34 years old, but another lefty in camp that could potentially grab a spot. Chris Devanski is a non-roster invite. Again, we'll talk about the non-roster guys a little bit more as camp rolls on and we see which ones are getting a lot of run. 40-man guys that probably won't make it. Huascar Brazaban has good stuff, had a lot of success with the Marlins, not a lot of success with the Mets, has options. I imagine he does not make the team, but you never know. Tyler Zuber got traded for at the deadline. Probably won't make the team, though. What did they say? Justin Hagenman, and who was the other guy? Is it Austin Warren? I believe they said are actually big starting rotation depth. So those guys, expect them to end up in Syracuse and be the next wave beyond, Tylor Megill, and I guess Canning and Blackburn should both make the team. So yeah, imagine them being a little bit behind Megill as far as starting pitching depth, not likely to make the roster. One guy I want to mention to sort of close us out here is Max Kranick. Max Kranick, I think, has an outside shot to make the team. If Jose Budo is not good to go due to health, Max Kranick will make the team. Now, I have no reason to believe that Budo won't be good to go, but I'm just sort of putting it in your mind now that if Budo ever goes down this year or is not performing, which would lead to a DFA because he doesn't have any options, but Max Kranick is the guy. Max Kranick is training to be a bulk reliever for the Mets. He was formerly a starting pitcher. He made the Mets roster in the NL Wildcard Series this past year. Didn't pitch, but shows you that they valued him enough to put him on a playoff roster. He's definitely got to watch in camp because there's also a world where the Mets decide, you know what? Let's stack bulk guys in this bullpen because maybe they aren't going to push Kodai Senga to start the year beyond 4 to 5 innings. Clay Holmes, how many innings does he go? He's stretched out quicker than anyone, but do they really want him throwing 6, 7 innings early on in his tenure as a starting pitcher, or is he kind of 5 and dive to start? Blackburn and Canning, obviously those guys, when they eventually become part of a 6-man rotation, maybe you want some more bulk help. So with that, Max Kranick is definitely a guy to keep your eye on. But anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. Tomorrow, I think I'm probably going to do a little bit of a show just on the first game of camp. And we'll see if there's anything else that we have to sort of fill that show out, or I'll just make it a prospect show with a little commentary about the game at the open of the show. But I am planning to record Saturday night most likely. So make sure that you are subscribed if you're watching on YouTube and you hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the episodes that come out. Also hit a like button there if you enjoyed the content today. If you are listening on the audio side, follow, rate, review, wherever you get your podcast. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description and go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first watch every single day. Now, for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything, the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.